there, spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scaryish podcast.
Woo.
I'm Robin Grace. Oh, shit, yeah, that whole chestnut. I'm Robin Grace, this is Adam Diaz.
Hello.
And today, we're here with a couple of new, hopefully, topics that we can chit-chat about, I guess.
Fun stuff. Robin, it's new. I promise you. What are you going to be covering?
I'm going to be covering the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, and you are?
I'm going to be covering the Dancing Plague of 1518. So before we go any further, let's go ahead and address that thing that she said at the beginning. I think about 15 episodes ago, we mentioned that someone in our Discord had said, hey, you guys have never covered the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. You should do it. It's super interesting. And we thought to ourselves, I think we have. So we went through all of our episodes, including episode 12, which is Haunted Asylums, listened to all of that, and we had not covered it. It's never been covered. And we put out a challenge to our listeners and said, hey, if you think we've covered it also, which several of them spoke up and said, I could have sworn you covered it, I just don't know what episode. And we went through everything, couldn't find it. We might have made mention to it at some point, but we've never covered it as an actual topic or as part of a subtopic. So we're finally going to do it. So we're finally doing the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. I'm super excited to have this finally covered because, I mean, we just did the Men in Black last episode. So we're getting through some of these ones that have been requested for a while that we're been slow to get around to. So it's pretty exciting. But if you think we've covered it, I promise you we haven't. So yeah, just wanted to address that.
All right. Yeah, so we'll get into that, but your topics first. So...
Mine is, my voice has recovered slightly, so I'm going to go ahead and remind everyone that it's January Patreon push.
Oh yes, you get to do that this episode.
I do indeed. Head over to patreon.com/Scaryish podcast and help us out by signing up and becoming one of our wonderful patrons. You can sign up for as little as $1 and you'll get ad-free episodes. That's right, $1 a month. Every episode completely ad-free. We do have tiers above that as well that give you more rewards and all the rewards that came from the previous tier, which we would absolutely love to have you there. It really helps the show. It really helps us take care of things on the back end like website hosting, podcast hosting, all that fun stuff. And the closer we get to 150, the more excited we get because at 150 patrons, we are going to go stay at the Stanley Hotel and record an episode there, which we are very, very excited to do.
That would be very, very cool. Never been to Colorado, so, you know, that'd be neat.
I've driven through it. I've never stopped there at any of the cities. I hear it's beautiful, and I hear the Stanley Hotel is beautiful and haunting. So we would definitely like to go, but patreon.com/Scaryish podcast is a wonderful way to help support us monetarily. Every little bit helps, so even if you can only give $1, it means the world to us. And then the folks who can give more than that, we sincerely appreciate you. So one last time, please head over to patreon.com/Scaryish podcast. It's $1 a month. It's 4 quarters. You can find that in your couch. So help us out. We would appreciate it. But like Robin said, my topic is going to be going first this episode. So why don't we just jump into it? So this week I actually had a really hard time picking a topic. I seriously could not land on anything for a while. I started covering one and it didn't work out. I started covering a second one. It turns out Robin had already done that one. So I had to scrap that script as well. Then I decided to go to our Discord and see if there were some topics that had been suggested there that may not have made its way into our Google Doc. And as I was scrolling, I bumped into this suggested topic by Lunabin. So shout out to Lunabin. And I figured since we've all been dealing with COVID-19 for 2 years or so, why not talk about another plague that wasn't as impactful and was actually kind of weird and interesting. So that's what I'm going to do. So dear listener, I present to you the Dancing Plague of 1518. So first and foremost, I'll go ahead and slap on the disclaimer that this could all be bullshit. So the thing that's very interesting about this is that if it is the case that it is all bullshit, it's a situation where it's 500 plus year old load of shit that we're talking about, because this tale really does date back that far and it is historically documented as having took place. So if it was a hoax, it's a hoax that has stood the test of time for the last 504 years. The events I'm going to describe are said to have actually taken place, and while there is debate to this day regarding the potential authenticity of the events and its potential cause, it's not debated whether or not whatever happened. That said, the Dancing Plague is supposedly something that actually happened all the way back in 1518, which is why it's titled the way it is. Y'all remember 1518, right?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, I figured you were there. Before I do this bit, I just want to say, whenever I do this, I type in what happened in and then the year. And it usually takes me to history.com. I get this wonderful timeline, and I can toss in some interesting facts for y'all. I think it's hilarious because Google autocorrect, I typed what happened in, and it suggested the first one, what happened in 1999. I was like, oh, that's interesting that people are looking that up. And the second one was, what happened in Tenet? Because seriously, that movie had a lot going on. It was super hard to understand, so I'm not shocked. That was number 2 on Google.
But it's a good movie.
I enjoyed it, yeah. I was like, I might have missed out on a lot of stuff. I probably need to watch it again, but it was fun. Anyways, y'all remember 1518, right? Oh, you don't? Well, that's probably because literally nothing happened back in 1518. Everyone just stood there with their arms at their sides. Because gasoline, guess what? That wasn't a thing. I can't tell you the cost per gallon. Houses didn't cost anything because they were made of sticks and mud and spit. They were basically giant bird nests. And no movies came out because the closest thing people had to them were the nightmares they had about the fact that they lived in 1518 and how awful it was. So no major facts except for this big event that happened in 1518. And I will say, in 1518, one of the only things that actually pops up on that list of like what happened in this year that existed then, that exists now, is music. They had music, we had music. It was very different, obviously. The only other thing that really existed then that exists now that we enjoy is sex. But back then there was only 2 positions, missionary and pile driver.
Oh, shut up.
You were either just taking it easy or you were going in there to make a statement. There was no in between whatsoever.
Oh my god.
So anyways, there was music.
Okay. Sorry. It's so stupid.
There was music, but it was 1518. So a bunch of the music was like orchestral, church-going type music. And while it is beautiful in a very specific way, it's not like that head bopping, knee slapping, pelvic thrusting stuff that we have today. And it's weird to think that a dancing plague could have broken out when there was, nothing that slapped really hard. The whole incident... I mean,
pile drivers slap pretty hard.
They do. You're doing it right. So this whole incident...
So dumb.
Took place. All right, I want to pause for just 1 second and just mention this is the first episode we're recording where I'm in Las Vegas and Robin is in California. So she gets my jokes slightly delayed by 0.5 seconds. So I keep going and then she starts laughing and it's this really good feeling of like, oh, wow, that joke actually did work. So anyways, this whole incident took place in a town called Strasbourg. Its location is what is now Eastern France. And currently it's like right on the border of France and Germany. Its territory was a bit different back in 1518 because obviously borders have changed quite a bit over the last 500 years, but the town itself is still essentially in the same location. It might have shifted based off of like its particular borders, but you get the picture. Strasbourg is the setting. So
cool.
Whether or not this was a plague in the traditional sense is obviously up for debate. We're not sure how this thing quote unquote spread or whatever, but one thing that certainly makes it feel like that's the case is that there is supposedly a patient zero. So the legend states that on July 14th, 1518, a woman named Frau Trophia walked out of her home and just began dancing. It sounds like this happened.
She didn't need permission to dance.
You don't need permission to dance. Dancing's not a crime. So according to, I have that joke later in my script. According to witnesses.
Do you really?
Yeah. From 500 years ago, so you know they can be trusted. There was no music at the time. There was no cause for celebration, like a birthday party or whatever. She just walked outside and started dancing. And her husband was like, what is she doing? But he just sort of ignored it like, all right, she wants to dance. She wants to dance. Happy wife, happy life, whatever. But the day wore on and she just kept dancing. And as the day turned to night, her husband asked her like, hey, can you stop? And she was just sort of in this weird state where she was ignoring him. And it was not like she was kind of dancing, like sort of just like shifting back and forth. Like she was dancing hardcore. And as full night began to set in, folks had taken notice and really began to realize that Frau Trophia was unable to stop. And the word began spreading throughout the town about what was happening. As the next day arrived, the sun came up and she was still dancing. So at this point, she's danced all the way through the night. She was unable to eat or drink during this random fit of dancing, and she danced until her body literally could not go on anymore. Her dancing went from what it had been, where it was enthusiastic, to these like weird jolts and violent spasms, because that's all her body really could do anymore, until she collapsed. And as her body lost its strength, she literally passed out in the street. So everyone in the town was like, dude, did you hear about Frau? She came outside and just started getting down. No music or anything. She just danced for over 24 hours and passed out. It's pretty hardcore. And when she passed out, she slept. I mean, she earned it. She passed out and slept for that whole day. It should be noted that as hardcore as this might sound, it's literally hardcore because her feet were literally bloody from dancing so much. She had danced her feet raw, and they had to be cared for and wrapped and placed into shoes to soften her steps when she woke up. And when she did wake up, she woke up on the third day. She slept all the way through that second day because she was absolutely exhausted. But as soon as she woke up, she stood up, she went back outside, and she started fucking dancing again. And people were like, oh shit, Frau's at it again. And they literally
She's just
went
like,
out.
I want to dance with somebody.
Yeah. With somebody who loves me. Except I don't think the husband joined in. I couldn't find any record of her husband joining in or whether or not he was afflicted. But anyways, she actually wound up having a crowd of people. She had dozens of people who came over and started watching her on the third day. Like, what is happening? Why is she dancing? Her feet look awful. She was sweating bullets. She looks like someone who's going through a very intense, very prolonged session of cardio and just can't seem to stop. And as the day wore on, people could see that she was literally bleeding through the shoes that they had put on her. So this is something where it's going from like kind of funny, kind of cool, kind of odd to kind of disturbing. And people watched and debated what was happening. And it was 1518, you know? So of course they blamed the devil, which meant that they had to blame Frau because...
I mean, who else is there to blame?
She must have done something, you know, to let the devil in or whatever. But there are also other folks in town who thought it's not possession, it's punishment from God. So either way, the dancing was the fault of Frau. Either she had done something to let the devil in or done something to anger God, who is now punishing her by making her dance and her feet bleed because she literally can't stop. And she didn't. She would dance anytime she was conscious. And while she was conscious, she would dance until her feet bled. She was completely exhausted. Her body would spasm. She would pass out. And essentially she would get treatment and this whole thing would start over again. So it's this really bizarre cycle of, you know, being awake, dancing until you drop, getting treatment, rising up again and dance, dance, dance. That's all she's going to do. So at the end of the week, it had been decided by her husband and some other authorities that she needed to be taken to the local shrine to appease/apologize to God for whatever it was that she had done that had angered God to punish her in this way. So they tied her up because she wouldn't stop moving even if they took her off her feet, threw her onto a wagon, and took her up to this shrine, which was like a day's ride. So once they got her out of town, the crowd kind of dispersed. Everyone kind of went back to their houses, and the authorities in the town were relieved. They're like, phew, glad that shit is done. It was really starting to become a distraction and scary. People were starting to get scared, like, who does that? And someone in the back of the meeting probably said something like, dancing's not a crime unless you do it without me. And then they were probably stoned to death because it was 1518, and that's the sort of shit that happens in 1518. Anyways, within a few days, word began to spread of more folks in town dancing. In fact, more than 30 people had taken to the streets and started dancing after Frau was taken. And
I assume back then, 30 is a lot.
Well, it's actually like one of the biggest towns in this region. So they had thousands of people living there, but it was still, that small town mentality. So they knew who people were. But when you go from one person that's having this sort of dancing fit to all of a sudden 30 after you thought you got rid of it, like literally a day later, thinking you got rid of this problem, it's very jarring. And these folks also danced until their feet bled and then collapsed in exhaustion after full days of dancing. So, and the craziest thing about the dancing plague is that it's very bizarre. No one knows what's happening, but it keeps spreading. And according to the book, and this is a real book, The Dancing Plague, The Strange True Story of an Extraordinary Illness, the city's archives from 500 years ago exist, and they show records of the dancing plague. And one such record reads, and it's kind of written almost in prose, like the way that it's structured, but it reads as follows. There's been a strange epidemic lately going amongst the folk, so that many in their madness began dancing, which they kept up day and night without interruption until they fell unconscious. Many have died of it. And this is where the considerable debate behind the dancing plague really kicks off. It's about how many folks died from this, and if any at all. Because what that debate comes down to is pretty simple. The texts of the time can be found stating things like this, like what I just read, where that it happened and that people died, but there isn't any official record of who died or any death toll from this particular quote-unquote plague, like records were kind of kept back in the day when an actual plague would arrive. It's not shocking. I mean, this was 500 years ago. There's debate today about death tallies with our current plague, and our technology is at a level where if you were to show someone some of the technology we have nowadays, their head would literally explode, and we still can't figure that shit out. So it's not shocking that 500 years ago, they couldn't get death totals written down if it existed. It is said that within a week of Frau being taken to the shrine, over 100 citizens were dancing themselves, in some cases, to death in the streets, and the rest of the folks in the town began to live in fear and sheltered in their homes. Doctors all over the city were at a loss for what was happening and could basically only try and treat the people when they would collapse because they were just constantly moving to the point where they could not treat them. Physicians from outside the town would come to investigate what was happening when they heard of it and help in any way they could, along with the local bishop who came to see what was this tragedy that had taken hold in the town of Strasbourg. And again, it was believed to either be possession by the devil or punishment from the Almighty. The bishop actually showed up and told folks, this is just like what happened in the city of Sunnydale when the demon suite showed up, season 6, episode 7, entitled Once More with Feeling. Look it up. Read your Bible, people. So,
Bible, the Buffy Bible, hell yeah.
Yeah, I figured you did enjoy that. I think that's the last episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer that I watched, actually.
Is it?
I'm pretty sure it's the last or one of the last. So,
oh my gosh, it is one of the best episodes of Buffy.
It's the musical episode, in case you folks were wondering.
Yeah, and people start dancing themselves till they till they burst into flames,
right?
Yeah, they burst into flames. There's a word for it, right?
Spontaneous human combustion.
Spontaneous combustion, yeah.
Yep, I've covered that too on the show. But anyways. Regardless of what these authority figures thought was the cause, it just continued to get worse. By the beginning of August, which is 2.5 weeks after it began, it said that nearly 400 people in the town were dancing with every waking moment. Can you imagine the town you live in, knowing that there were 400 people that were dancing themselves to death and no one knew why? You would be freaked the fuck out.
I just can't even imagine. Like, back then, really, that is a lot of people. You know, it's just, even if, in this day and age, if I heard that there were like 50 people that were dancing until they died in my city, I would be like, what the hell is going on?
Right? It's just sort of a scary thing. Again, it said that some of the folks died, but again, we don't know for sure. But no matter who came to help, and how they treated these folks, there was really nothing they could do. They treated them with medicine or magic or prayer. Nothing really seemed to work. People just kept dancing until they collapsed. Their feet and their body was torn to ribbons at this point, and their loved ones and any doctor would basically try and treat them when they could. And some folks just outright tied up their family members and strapped them to a bed where when they were awake, they would thrash violently as if they were dancing in place, which seems almost like seizures or convulsions, basically dancing without standing upright. And August of 1518 in Strasbourg was probably one of the craziest and scariest times to be alive, especially since you really don't know what's happening, but you know something's very wrong. But as the month began to reach its end towards the end of August, folks that had been dancing their literal lives away began to finally sit still. And slowly the dancing plague started to fade, and by September, the victims had all stopped dancing and were all recovering on bed rest from the damage of constantly dancing, essentially, for days and weeks at a time, and the things that can happen to you when you never ever rest. Aside from the debate of if people died and how many, the biggest debate about the dancing plague is the obvious one. What caused this to happen? So scientists visited the area.
Sick ass beat.
Yeah, I thought time travel, someone played Lady Gaga, blew their fucking minds, Gaga got them, and they couldn't stop it. They couldn't shut it down. They couldn't stop it. But, that's just my crazy theory. Scientists actually visited this area for decades to come. And it's kind of funny because when I was reading about some of the stuff where people would go and sort of like measure the toxins in the food and things like that, essentially just by using science, which in 1518 looked crazy, they were being labeled as like witches and sorcerers, so they really couldn't conduct many experiments without being ostracized.
It was just a lot of cocaine. They were eating lots and lots of cocaine.
Like Pam
or
from
snorting
season
it or
5
whatever. And so
of Archer.
So they had to do something. Yeah, they had to do something to burn off all that crazy energy.
Who knows? You might be right. So one of the pieces of information from the story that began to be debated and is still debated to this day is whether or not Patient Zero even existed, whether or not Frau Trophia was a person. The debate happened once several generations had passed because there really is no word or record about what happened to her after she was carted off to the shrine. And again, there being no quote-unquote record, there's just not much that you can really keep track of from 500 years ago, aside from the fact that they did talk about this dancing plague in their written records. It is believed that what actually happened is a woman named Winifred Sanderson arrived with her 2 sisters, sang a funky rendition of what we now know to be I Put a Spell on You, and cursed the town to dance until they died.
There's so many of these dancing until you die things, man.
Obviously, that's Hocus Pocus, in case you haven't seen it.
Yes.
If you haven't seen Hocus Pocus, what the fuck are you doing with your life? Let's be honest.
That should be a Halloween tradition.
So it is believed at this point, from literal centuries of study, that this could have been the result of 2 actual possibilities. This is not a joke. Or a combination of these 2. The first is mass hysteria, which, as I've mentioned before, in crazy cases where things have happened to a bunch of people, I personally believe mass hysteria is a label that is thrown onto some sort of large outbreak of unknown behavior where our science essentially fails to establish what happened. When we're unable to determine a cause, we just slap on mass hysteria and we say, we don't know, everyone went crazy. That's what happened.
Isn't there like a folie à deux type thing?
I mean, folie à deux is specifically when 2 people go crazy at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Well, this would be like Foley 500 or so.
Yeah.
It really feels when I see something like mass hysteria, it's like an inconclusive tag more than anything to me. I would understand if it were some form of illness that could actually be chalked up to stress-induced mass hysteria, because stress can do crazy things to a human being. Like, the pressure and fear of your day-to-day life is intense. And it is important to acknowledge that. Stress, just the physical representation of the pressure that we feel from our life, from our responsibilities, can cause actual physical symptoms like aches, pains, chest pain, or feeling like your heart is racing, exhaustion, trouble sleeping, headaches, dizziness, shaking, high blood pressure, muscle tension, jaw clenching, stomach or digestive problems, trouble having sex, weak immune system, anxiety, irritability, depression, panic attacks, ulcers, and just general sadness. Like, seriously, some of these symptoms are the same symptoms you would see if you were actually afflicted with a cold, a flu, heart problems, heart failure, heart attack, urinary tract infection, stroke, ulcer, again, which can come from stress. Like, the way you feel about what's happening to you, if what's happening to you is rough and you're having a hard time with it, can cause you physical illness. And so when I hear stuff like stress-induced mass hysteria, that's what I think, you know? I think if there was like a wave of heart attacks going through a specific community, it could be from fear and stress of just like their general existence. But you know what doesn't happen from stress? You know it's not a symptom? It's
dancing until you die.
Spontaneously fucking dancing until you die. Mass hysteria can cause a lot of crazy things to happen, but dancing plague doesn't seem like it holds water. But this long ago, people literally thought dancing was a symptom or a treatment of sickness. This isn't a joke. Like, they used to treat tarantula bites with dancing to like work out the poison in the 11th century, and in some places still in the 15th century. And no, I am not making that up. That is 100% true. I didn't just decide to add in a bullshit fact. This wasn't isolated either.
I mean, you got a lot of bullshit facts. It's hard to tell which ones
I do.
are
That's
real.
why I let you know. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was just the largest breakout. In the 1,000 years that passed between 500 AD and 1500 AD, 7 other cases of quote-unquote dancing plague had been reported. What all those regions, including this one, had in common was that they were poor, in severe starvation, and riddled with disease, which leads to the second culprit folks believe caused the dancing plague, food poisoning. Now, when I've gotten food poisoning, I've typically just exploded out of both ends for roughly 24 hours before my body is just completely empty and then I begin to feel better. But that's with today's foods. I feel like if I ate anything that existed in 1518 that was like quote unquote properly cooked, I would get immediate food poisoning and just start exploding. It is believed that the grains that they used...
Sounds so hot.
It is believed that the grains that they used to make their bread, which was rye bread, was actually producing a toxic fungi that was producing psychoactive episodes in these people. So it was bad for them, and it was making them essentially trip balls. The more they were dehydrated, it got worse, and then they would starve themselves because they were dancing, and then, of course, they would come down and they'd crash super fucking hard and just pass out. They would then be replenished with water and more bread. And the theory basically states that these people ate this bad bread that would have had a structural integrity similar to that of lysergic acid diethylamide, also known as LSD. So basically, these people were tripping fucking balls and dancing their asses off because of drugs. And that sounds super plausible to me. Dancing plague is actually something that hits a lot of places today, especially like EDC out here in Las Vegas. Those people usually wind up in the medical tent too, but I bet they're not treated with water and more LSD though, to make sure that they don't dance until they die.
I mean, you never know. We've never been in those tents.
I've never been to EDC, and I've never danced until I dropped, that's for sure. So, since this whole thing happened 500 years ago, realistically, we can never be absolutely sure. But for me, I'd say it's a pretty likely scenario that it's a combination of tons of stress and tons of acid that was enough to have people dancing until they died. And that, my spooky friends, is the dancing plague of 1518.
Nice.
Thanks. And before we move into Robin's topic, we're going to take a quick commercial break.
All right, everybody, welcome to the other half of the episode. This week, I'm going to be covering a topic bequeathed unto me by Adam, because he obviously knows my jam. I'm the haunted asylum lady, apparently. This is one that I'm kind of surprised that we haven't covered yet, as it is pretty well known. At least to me, hearing that name, it just is synonymous with haunted asylums. So this week, we're going to be staying stateside and heading over to West Virginia to the city of Weston. And we're going to be covering the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, subsequently renamed to the Weston State Hospital. And it goes through a bunch of changes, but it dates back to 1850, or the 1850s, when it was authorized by the Virginia General Assembly for construction, getting put into business, doing all that stuff. So construction began in 1858. It was initially being conducted, the construction was, by prison workers, of course, because, free labor. Then later on, skilled stonemasons were brought in from Germany and Ireland to continue construction. In 1861, the Civil War erupts out here in America. Virginia is one of those states that decides to secede from the United States. They demand that the hospital's construction funds, whatever they hadn't used yet, to be used for the war effort instead. But before this happens, about $27,000, which is over $500,000 today, is seized by the Ohio Volunteer Infantry. And this group of people, they take this money and put it towards the establishment of the reorganized government of Virginia. So they create this organization that supports the northern states during the war with this money. Interesting historical fact. I had no idea. I didn't know this was a thing at all.
Sounds like Virginia was really split on what they were going to do for this Civil War thing.
The money was given back eventually to resume construction in 1861. The hospital's name was then changed at the time when West Virginia was admitted to the U.S. as a state in 1863. So in 1863, they changed it to the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane, which sounds super cozy. I don't know why. It's just so dumb. Who names it that? They thought that was a better name than Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum also doesn't sound good.
Yeah, having lunatic or insane in your name, pretty rough.
So, October 1864 sees the admittance of the first patients into the institution, the very first of which was a female housekeeper admitted due to domestic violence. You also have to remember that in this era of mental illness, they still included menstrual derangement, laziness, desertion of husband, and things like masturbation as a mental illness.
Lock me up. Fuck.
Yeah, pile drivers for a mental illness, dude. Okay. So stupid.
That's a good joke.
Construction on the hospital continued even through operation into the year 1881. So it was being worked on pretty consistently throughout the years. The hospital was designed to be completely self-sufficient. So it consisted of a farm, it had its own dairy, it had its own water supply, and of course, it had to have its own cemetery. All of this equated to about 666 acres of land.
Of course, that's the amount of land.
I don't know how much I believe the fact that it had 666. I don't know. I think someone decided, like, that sounds like a scary number. I'm just going to put that on there. I don't know. It could have been rounded out to slightly different square acreage, or acreage, square feet, whatever. But yeah, supposedly 666 acres of land. Don't know how much of that I believe. But there were a lot of open spaces. There was sunlight. There was fresh air. The goal was to be as far from, quote unquote, big city vibes as possible. This was believed to have negative effects on the patients. Like, they wanted to take the patients away from big city life and give them something a little more simple, a little more fresh, clean, that kind of thing. According to the Kirkbride method/plan, mental illness was caused by the sinful things from the city.
Wow.
The whole concept dealt with fresh air, fresh, healthy meals, and kind of like a clean, bright outlook. Dr. Thomas Kirkbride is thought to be the first doctor in the United States to recognize mental illness as a disease that could be cured.
Didn't they think this as well at Eastern State Penitentiary? I think we heard something like that when we took the tour, that like they had a very specific, because like now it's like just in the city, but before that it used to just be like Eastern State Penitentiary was just like up on that hill in the middle of nowhere, essentially. So I feel like there's a lot of similarities on the East Coast, especially between some of these like older institutions.
I don't doubt it, because the Kirkbride plan/method is actually a plan that spread throughout the mental institutions. Like, this was what mental institutions were built on. So the fact that we heard that when we went to Eastern State is probably due to this particular method or plan. So in 1902, a gas well was drilled on the hospital grounds, which is there to make it even more self-sufficient. In 1913, the hospital was renamed the Weston State Hospital. The hospital housed 717 patients by 1880. I think it initially was built to only hold 200 and some odd patients. So 717 by 1880, over 1,800 by 1949, and about 2,600 by 1950s. So that's a lot of people in one area. I'm trying to remember how many people were in my high school, but I definitely don't think it was 2,600.
My high school grand total was 500. My graduating class was like 120, 125. Yeah.
Wow, that's so tiny.
Yep, we were very small.
Yeah, a little tiny school, little baby school. I think my graduating class was like almost 400. It was like 300 plus.
It's a lot of people.
So, yeah.
Well, at least to me, from small town Midwest America.
Yeah, so this wasn't this place wasn't designed to house that many patients. So it obviously led to a problem with overcrowding. And with like many stories of these mental institutions, there were a lot of problems. Continuing on with the ideals of Kirkbride, it was thought that it was best for family members to avoid contacting their mentally ill relatives. They were told to never open letters that patients sent them. And it was kind of like...
That's fucked up.
Their whole idea of isolating the patients. They wanted total isolation of these people. In 1938, a report was released from a survey committee organized by a group of North American medical organizations. And in this report, it was found that among the institute's population were epileptics, alcoholics, addicts, and those with mental disabilities. And I don't know about you, but these aren't people you would normally find to be quote unquote insane, you know?
It's like, I understand the difference in mindset between now and back then, but the idea is so horrific to me that someone could be epileptic and they look at them like they're crazy. You know, it's like they're having seizures. They need help. They're not crazy. They're just twitching violently, involuntarily, and people are treating them like they're crazy. Like,
well, like alcoholics and addicts aren't necessarily insane.
No, I totally agree. It's an example of like how backwards thinking things were before, and how like we've slowly started to come out of that up to 2022.
Yeah. So this place even had a department that was kind of closed off for disabled veterans of the Civil War because they didn't even know what to do with those people. Because I'm sure they're dealing with injuries, they're dealing with PTSD, they're dealing with a whole bunch of stuff, and they just didn't know what to do with them. In 1949, a series of reports was released by the Charleston Gazette, and these reports told of poor sanitization, insufficient lighting, and they even had insufficient heating for a lot of the structure, and not enough furniture for people to use. In most of the complex, it was just awful. One of the wings had been damaged due to a fire set by a patient in 1935, and it was rebuilt using money from the Works Progress Administration, which is a successor of the Federal Emergency Relief Administration. In this wing, it was kind of luxurious and compared to the other ones, but still, the people that were in those not so luxurious wings had horrible conditions. If there were patients that were not able to be controlled, those patients would be locked in cages. And then there were some patients that would be chained to walls. In the early 1950s, the hospital was home for the West Virginia Lobotomy Project, and the goal for this project was to use lobotomies to reduce the number of patients in asylums in order to prevent overcrowding. And if you folks don't know what a lobotomy is, they literally shove something up your nose and scrape the front of your brain off. So, I don't know.
So they thought they were basically going to lobotomize people so they could release them?
I guess so, because when you lobotomize somebody, it just kind of... I don't know if you've ever seen Sucker Punch?
Yeah, I've seen it. Bleh.
Spoilers for Sucker Punch from like 2000 and, I don't know, 2010, 2008, something like that. But at the end of the movie, she gets a lobotomy, and the guy that is like in love with this character and wants to, you know, kind of sexually abuse this character is really disappointed because she is just nothing after that. She doesn't move, she doesn't talk, she's just nothing. And I think that was the idea behind them wanting to do this. They won't have a bunch of patients fighting them all the time, you know. They've just become much more easily manageable people. And then in 1952, a doctor supposedly performed 228 ice pick lobotomies in the span of 2 weeks in West Virginia.
Wow.
That's a lot of lobotomies. Dr. Walter Freeman held the legacy for quote unquote Operation Ice Pick. That was his legacy or whatever, as Trans-Allegheny's most notorious doctor. So he was kind of the king of ice pick lobotomies. By the 1980s, the hospital was reduced in population due to change in treatments for mental illness. I assume that they wanted to treat people better, and they took out the people that weren't necessarily considered mentally insane or, whatever, and took them out. But the patients that did remain dealt with other issues, of course. In February of 1986, the governor at the time, Arch Moore, announced plans to build a new psychiatric facility in another area within the state while converting the asylum into a prison, because why not? They were already treating patients there like they were prisoners. They literally had cells, What ended up happening, though, was that once the new hospital, the William R. Sharp Jr. Hospital, was built, they closed the existing one. So they closed the Weston State Hospital in 1994. There was a man who had spent 60 years of his life in the facility.
Oh my God.
So he spent 60 years there. He was in tears when he found out that the building was being closed. He didn't want to leave his home. He considered this place his home. He lived there for 60 years. He actually died a couple weeks after he was relocated. I don't know if it's because he was heartbroken after being yanked away from his home or he was just old, but that's nuts.
Yeah, it's super sad.
It just living somewhere for 60 years in those conditions, though.
It reminds me of Shawshank Redemption, like the old man who gets out like halfway through the movie.
Oh, does he try to stay in all the time?
Spoiler alerts for people who haven't seen Shawshank Redemption yet, but he kills himself instead. He gets released from prison and he's like, I don't like the world the way it is now. He was in jail for too long and that's all he knows, so he kills himself.
Wow. Jesus. The movie's old if you haven't seen it already. All right. So the facility was left vacant afterwards, except for the occasional church event or fair or grounds tour or something like that. In 1999, all 4 floors of the interior of the building were damaged by city and county police officers who decided they were going to play paintball in the building one night. So the incident actually resulted in 3 of the officers being dismissed over it. So they got fired for playing paintball in this building.
I love paintball as much as the next guy, but I wouldn't play it at work. I'm not fucking stupid.
There have been efforts towards the adaptive reuse of the building, including proposals to convert it into a Civil War museum, hotel, golf course, spa, things like that. Nothing ever happens.
Paintball field,
yeah. Nothing ever happens to those proposals, though. They never get approved. In 2000, the Weston Hospital Revitalization Committee went to work preserving the building and attempting to find the right tenant for it. It's funny that you mentioned tenant earlier tonight. You're like, the things I was searching for. What happens in tenant?
It's a different tenant, but yeah.
There are also said to be a number of permanent ghostly tenants. One of these permanent residents seems to be that of a little boy who's been spotted in the corner of a very certain room. There's a ghost that goes by the name of Lily. They believe that she lived and died within the asylum, and some believe that she was actually dropped off at the hospital by her parents who couldn't or wouldn't take care of her. She died at the age of 9 of pneumonia, which is super sad. She is said to be one of the more commonly reported entities, and it's often reported that people feel the sensation of a child holding their hand or tugging on their clothes, even tales of disappearing candy. I will say I had a lollipop once when I was a lot younger, like high school. And it was one of those lollipops that was shaped like a heart or something, like a star, something like that. And it was wrapped in really cute plastic wrap. And it had a nice, cute bow on it. And I had it in my pencil cup or my pencil mug or whatever. And one day the candy part was gone, but the plastic and the bow and stick were all perfectly there still, but the candy was gone.
That sounds like an older sibling / parent stole from you.
Ants. Okay, ants. There's bugs. Bugs will get that shit. Ants will get that shit.
I guess.
So, just saying, that could be a thing. Strange noises have... who else would make that disappear?
I would. If my kid had a candy and they took too long to eat the goddamn thing, I would wait till they weren't around. I would take it out of the wrapper and I would put it back exactly how it was. And then when they would open it and realize it wasn't there, if they asked me, I'd be like, ants. That's why I don't leave candy laying around, kid.
So other than that, strange noises have also been heard throughout the entire building, like the sound of giggling or children's disembodied laughter, which is, to me, the worst. People touring the facility have often felt that they were being watched or were, quote unquote, not alone. Another well-known ghost is that of Ruth, and it's said that during her lifetime within the asylum, she was aggressive and violent to others. So I assume this is not a very nice ghost. She also really didn't like men. People have reported encountering her on the first floor near her old holding cell. Then there's Dean, and Dean was murdered in his room. He's said to haunt that room or on the second floor, where people have heard a voice warning them to get out in a room where a double suicide had occurred. There's also said to be another ghost on the second floor that tugs on the pants of people walking along, and it's thought to be the ghost of a stabbing victim, and this victim is using his last bits of strength to grab someone's attention from the ground.
Jesus, this place is super haunted.
Of course, there is a nurse ghost that is said to be that of Elizabeth, and she leaves doors open while going around on her rounds. The geriatric ward and veterans wards are also said to be incredibly active. There have been the sounds of tortured moans of the wounded, heavy footfalls like the sound of boots, and even misty forms and shadows that seem to appear throughout the halls. Ooh.
Wow.
It's not known exactly how many people have died within the asylum's walls, as there are only a few of the headstones in the hospital cemetery that actually have names on them. There are lots of bricks, though, that have numbers on them, which I assume are just nameless people that are buried there, maybe. That being said, there are known suicides and murders that have occurred there in the asylum. In 2004, 3 small museums were opened on the first floor of the main hospital building dedicated to military history, toys, and mental health. They were soon closed due to fire code violations, because, that happens. On August 29th, 2007, the building was auctioned off, and it went to a Joe Jordan, who paid $1.5 million for the main 242,000 square foot building. He began maintenance projects on the hospital grounds afterwards. In October of 2007, they held a fall festival there, and they have guided historic and paranormal daytime tours, as well as the occasional evening ghost hunt and paranormal tours. You can do a bunch of different things. Jordan's daughter, Rebecca Jordan Gleason, has reported experiencing quite the scary ordeal herself. While being the only person within the facility one night, 40 of the 906 doors in the building slammed shut all at once.
Wow. That's fucking weird.
I would be real scared. I would run the fuck out of there, dog. Nope, you can't find me after that. That's horrifying. In the main building of the asylum, known as the Kirkbride, named after the Kirkbride method for mental institutions, there are several rooms that serve as the museum on the first floor. So, in this museum, there are paintings, poems, and drawings that have been created by patients in the art therapy programs within the asylum when it existed. There is also a room dedicated to the different medical treatments and restraints used in the hospital's past. So, things like straitjackets and the hydrotherapy tub can be found there. And for those of you that don't know, the hydrotherapy tubs were where patients were forced to lay in very hot, boiling hot water, or very, very cold water baths. And they would be strapped down into it. So they'd be stuck there. It's like they had a cover over the entire tub where only their neck would be hanging out.
I don't understand the thought that torturing people would make them better,
I don't know, man.
Certain things, I can kind of follow along with the science of it, but strapping someone into something boiling hot or freezing cold is batshit crazy.
And they would be there for hours or days.
It's not like the cryotherapy that people do now where they go into something that's super cold for your muscles, but they come out before they get hurt.
These days it's physiotherapy purposes, and they're only in there for a couple minutes, right? When they dip their bodies into ice baths and things like that. They're not forced to lay there all day. It's just nuts. During tours, guides dress in 1800s nurse outfits, like straight out of Nurse Ratched type nurse outfits. You can see the first floor. It's probably even more old school than Nurse Ratched now that I think about it, because Nurse Ratched is like 90s or like 1900s, right?
I've heard that phrase before. I have no idea what it references, to be honest with you.
I think it's like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Nurse Ratched is a character from that, I think. But you can see the first floor or even all 4 floors if you want a longer tour. You can see old staff apartments. You can see the operating room and even the morgue. Also, you can go for one of those overnight ghost hunting tours too, if you want. Fun game fact. In Fallout 76, Fort Defiance is this particular facility. So that's kind of cool.
When you said West Virginia, I was wondering what games this building has appeared in, so I'm not shocked that it was Fallout 76.
West Virginia. If you guys have never played Fallout 76, it takes place in fucking West Virginia. Country Roads Take Me Home. It's also been featured on Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures, both reported believing that the structure is haunted. However, much that's believable because Adam hates them. So, well, he hates Ghost Adventures. I don't know. Some guides...
It's just like, you're not always going to get possessed everywhere you go. You're not always going to find a ghost, so...
Some guides and visitors believe that the facility is a doorway between worlds, that spirits kind of stop there a short while before moving on to other destinations, while others can't move on and kind of become stuck in this area. So, yeah, maybe that's why a lot of weird things happen here. Who knows?
A place that's had such horrific things in its past, it's not shocking to me that there's so many hauntings, but... I will say, the more you went through that list, the more it made me want to go there. So maybe 125 patrons will head over to West Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand why this is such a heavily requested topic, because it is one of the more haunted locations. I know that everywhere's like the most haunted, blah, 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 and derp. But, you know, just listening to the stories of it, it is, you know, a very historic landmark. And as far as that goes, it's had such horrific things happen within its walls. And it has so much history to it that the people of West Virginia, I'm sure, are very familiar with. So I'm really happy that we finally covered it. So good job, Robin.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. I think it's just about everything we have for episode 214. So thank you to those of you who listened. We appreciate you. If you have a story you'd like to share with us, it doesn't necessarily have to be about either of our topics. It can be supernatural, paranormal, coincidental, true crime, extraterrestrial, whatever. Feel free to reach out to us by emailing storytime@scaryish.com or going to our website, scaryish.com, and clicking contact us. Fill out that form. It will come directly to us. You can also hit us up on our social medias. Facebook is facebook.com/scarishpodcast. Twitter is @scarishpod, and Instagram is @scarishpodcast. Robin, for folks who would like to donate to us, how can they do so?
You can go to patreon.com/scarishpodcast, and those are monthly donations. Tiers start at $1 a due, 4 quarters, less than a chocolate bar. Well, depending on the chocolate bar. And you can get ad-free episodes, things like that. If you're not into the monthly donation type thing, you can also go to Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast, and those are one-time donations. Again, all your donations go to helping us upgrade our studio setup and kind of keep us going, help us keep making this spooky content.
Spooky. Yeah, that's everything we have for episode 214. Thank you so much to everyone who listened. We sincerely appreciate you, and that's the end. So, Robin, why don't you go ahead and sign us out?
Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.